What would be the better move for the New York Mets this offseason? Sign Kris Bryant or trade for Josh Donaldson? I want to discuss that on today's episode of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Now, on today's show, what I want to discuss is whether the Mets should trade for Josh Donaldson. In the first segment, I'm going to make the case for why this fits the Mets window right now to win, why the contract is not as bad as some believe. I'll go into the advanced metrics on his past season a little bit as well. Then in the second segment, I'm going to start comparing Kris Bryant's numbers to Josh Donaldson, because while there's this perception that Bryant is still a much better player, that is not exactly the case. Then lastly, in the final segment, I'm going to talk about what it could cost to acquire Donaldson when it comes to the trade package, and also another piece the Twins have that could be very interesting, a left-handed reliever that would fit the Mets bullpen very well. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets at justbaseball.com. So let's start off where fans are already probably upset with me for even proposing a Josh Donaldson trade. The money. He is still owed a lot of money, but that is also why you can acquire Josh Donaldson without giving up too much. Here are the exact details of the contract. Over the next 2 years, he's getting $21 million a year. Now, there's a really interesting stipulation in this contract. If he gets traded, his club option changes to a mutual option. Now, what a mutual option means is essentially now both parties have the right to refuse to exercise the option. So right now, the Twins have a club option. If it becomes a mutual option, Donaldson could say, look, I don't even want to play for the Mets again in a third year if he were to be traded. But here's where that last year becomes really complicated. Right now at the Twins, they have a $16 million club option with an $8 million buyout. If he gets traded, Donaldson gets $2 million immediately from the new club. But then that buyout becomes $6 million. So you aren't really changing the overall money. It just changes when Donaldson would receive some of the money. And then again, it becomes a mutual option on that $16 million deal. If the Mets were to decide to not want to exercise that third-year option, they would then have to pay a $6 million buyout because they already paid $2 million of that $8 million buyout up front when he got traded. So that is the basics of what Josh Donaldson's making. Essentially, if you want to make it really simple, over the next 2 years, he's guaranteed $50 million. And if you were to accept that club option, that would be an extra $18 million on top of the 42 he's owed over the next 2 years. So then suddenly it's $60 million. All right. So with all that said, let's just talk about why this makes a lot of sense for the New York Mets right now. When it comes to this team, with Max Scherzer, with Starling Marte, Eduardo Escobar, Mark Canha, the core they just brought in through free agency, Josh Donaldson fits that window perfectly. And the Mets have talked about, and Billy Epler has talked about, wanting to keep these deals that they're giving out right now short because you're trying to be a different team maybe in 3 years. You don't know what's going to come from your farm system. You don't know which stars you'll have. Suddenly, maybe it's a Brett Beatty, a Francisco Alvarez that are cost-controlled stars, and now you can build a roster around those pieces. So you want to remain flexible. You don't want to lock yourself in to too many long-term deals. You already got Lindor on the books for a really long time. You don't want to tie all the money up right now, and then in 2 years, you're trying to make moves, and that roster is just not very flexible. So the goal this offseason so far has been to keep those contracts short. Donaldson fits right into that window. Now, there's obviously concern. This is a player that just turned 36 years old this month. So that is what you're worried about. You're paying for his age 36 and age 37 season. This is already a really old team with aforementioned Scherzer, Marte, Escobar, and Canna all in their 30s. And then you also have Robinson Cano on the books, Jacob deGrom in his 30s. I mean, there's a lot of older veteran players on this team, but to me, that also is why Donaldson makes a lot of sense to slide into the hot corner. I'm going to go through the numbers a little bit more in a bit, but what this guy can bring to your team, incredible pop, great on base guy. No one's ever said anything bad about Josh Donaldson. And when it comes to acquiring him, because he's owed so much money and the Twins want to get off that contract, he is a negative asset despite being a really good player. And these are the type of deals that Steve Cohen needs to jump on, because this is where his money really does give him a huge edge. Because for another team trading for Josh Donaldson, maybe you need the Twins to eat half of that contract. But then suddenly, if Josh Donaldson is only owed $30 million from the new team instead of 50, suddenly the prospect capital going back is much greater. Simply by eating the entire contract, you can get Josh Donaldson for pennies on the dollar when it comes to prospect return, and get a player that'll slide right into the middle of your lineup, be an above average defensive third baseman, and be a really strong hitter. The one thing I want to say before I get into some advanced metrics, you're talking about the guy that since 2015, when you look at weighted runs created plus, which measures hitters based on a league average of 100, at 142, this has been the best offensive third baseman in baseball since 2015. And if you look at the numbers, they have not dropped off much at all over the last couple of years. Now let's show the advanced metrics. Oh, that's Kris Bryant. We'll get to that in a bit. All right. So Josh Donaldson, if you're looking at his advanced metrics and you just throw out the age, if you just look at the numbers we're seeing on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, this guy is still one of the best hitters in baseball. When it comes to average exit velocity, he is in the top 1 percentile of the league. He's in the 99th percentile. Max exit velocity, 93rd percentile. Hard hit percentage, 95th percentile. Expected WOBA, 92nd percentile. Expected slugging, 92nd percentile. Barrel percentage, 95th percentile. Walk percentage, 94th percentile. Chase rate, 84th percentile. And even getting to the defense, outs above average, 63rd percentile. So he is still a guy that hits the ball really hard, and for a lot of power, obviously, gets his home runs while playing above average defense at third base. Tell me that's not exactly the type of player that we've been talking about the Mets needing for the past couple of weeks as we've gone through the Kris Bryants, the Jose Ramirez's, all these different players that can slide in and play third base every day. This guy is really good. And when you compare his number to Kris Bryant, I think the case becomes even more clear why the Mets should be all in on this move to trade for Josh Donaldson next season. I'll discuss that more in just a minute. This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar or even better than a candy bar, and that is Built Bar, which is filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavor, covered in chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, while being high in protein. You get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. There's so many flavors to choose from, whether it's the raspberry bar, mint brownie, cherry, double chocolate, cookies and cream, or peanut butter brownie. If you go to built.com, you can order a mixed box where you can get a bunch of different flavors for the holiday season. If you want to give them out to your family, put a flavor in each stocking and just go wild on Built Bar. These really are delicious treats that are healthy. So if you want to try them today, again, go to built.com. Make sure you use the promo code LOCK15 and you're going to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, so before we get into the Kris Bryant, Josh Donaldson comparison, I just want to put a disclaimer out there. I do not hate Kris Bryant, okay? It might seem like that if you've been listening to this show the last couple of weeks, because I have talked down this signing about why I don't think it's necessarily the best fit for the Mets, but it's not because I don't think he's a good player. And I was campaigning for the Mets to trade for Kris Bryant at the deadline and last offseason. But as this team is starting to come together, the reason why I am not all in on a Kris Bryant acquisition is simply due to the years and that deviation from what seems like the Mets plan this offseason. Their plan has been keep deals short. So giving Kris Bryant a 6 or 7 year deal concerns me, especially with the concerns I have about the defense, because even though he has his perceived value due to his versatility, it didn't really show up last year. He was one of the worst defenders in baseball. And then you add on to that the fact that the offense has been on a steady decline with Kris Bryant. And those are the things that concern me. Not about his impact on the 2022 Mets, but what his impact would be on the 2025 Mets. And that's the difference between these two players when you're talking about acquiring them. Is Donaldson would be for 2, maybe 3 years, and Bryant is going to be for at least 5, if not up to 7 years. So that is the main difference. But also, let's just now get into the offensive value they had this past season. Kris Bryant hit 265, Josh Donaldson 247. A little bit of a big difference there, but then you go to on base percentage and same player. Bryant 353, Donaldson 352. Slugging percentage 481 for Kris Bryant, 475 for Josh Donaldson. 25 home runs for Kris Bryant, 26 for Donaldson. They both had exactly 73 RBIs. And then you go to weighted runs created plus, Kris Bryant 123, Josh Donaldson 124. So again, about the same. Donaldson actually played 9 less games, had 43 less at bats, but overall, you're talking about very similar offensive production from these guys. Now, I've already mentioned it. Bryant's younger, more athletic. He's going to bring value on the base pass that Donaldson does not, and he brings versatility defensively that Donaldson does not. But still, with that, Bryant was worth minus 10 outs above average this past season and minus 4 outs above average at third base, whereas Josh Donaldson was worth 1 out above average, also 1 defensive run saved, grading out as an above average third baseman despite his age. Let's get to the baseball savant pages. I already showed you Josh Donaldson's. So there it is again. If you're looking on YouTube, I talked about it already, how he hits the ball harder than most players in baseball still, even at 36. Here's Kris Bryant for comparison. So those numbers for Kris Bryant drop off a lot. I was talking about average exit velocity. As I already said, Josh Donaldson was in the 99th percentile, top 1% of the league. Kris Bryant, 28th percentile. So here's one guy who's hitting the ball harder than anyone else. Here's another guy that's not even league average when it comes to average exit velocity. Hard hit percentage, 42% for Kris Bryant. I already said with Josh Donaldson, 95th percentile. You look at, the barrel percentage, 67th percentile. You had Donaldson. What was that? It was 95th percentile. I mean, you just jump back and forth between these two guys. It's very clear the difference. Expected slugging for Donaldson, 92nd percentile. Expected slugging for Bryant, 61st percentile. So all of this is to say that when you're looking at these two players, if you're just looking at the percentile rankings and the batted ball metrics and all these things, Donaldson is grading out as a better hitter. It's just the age. It's simply coming down to one guy being younger than the other one. And defensively, again, where age would really show up for a lot of players, Donaldson is still the better defensive third baseman. So all I am saying when it comes to acquiring Donaldson over Kris Bryant is it fits the Mets window. Josh Donaldson is the perfect bridge to a Brett Beatty. 2 years. I mean, Beatty could graduate on the second year of that deal for Donaldson, and Donaldson could be moved to DH or, they split time or however they ultimately end up shaking that up. But Donaldson makes sense for what the Mets have on their roster and their farm system. Kris Bryant, as I've talked about, I don't know where he fits long term. After the first year, second year, is he an outfielder? Is he a left fielder? How's that glove aging if it didn't look great this past year? And what do years 4 through 7 look like on that contract? That's what concerns me. Whereas even if you're going to throw the Beatty element out of this discussion entirely, I already talked about Jose Ramirez a couple weeks ago. How about 2 years of Donaldson? Then Jose Ramirez is a free agent. You don't have to trade anything to get the best, all-around third baseman in baseball. That's a pretty nice deal as well. So that is the thing. As I continue to seemingly bash Kris Bryant, that's not what I'm aiming to do. But when I'm looking at the Mets' long-term plans, I just think that next big contract can be given to someone better than Kris Bryant. And even though Donaldson would be a big contract, it's a short big contract. And you're really just looking at 2022. And on the 2022 Mets, I think Josh Donaldson's bat will fit in just as well as Kris Bryant's will. And his glove might even be better over at third base. But What will it take to acquire Josh Donaldson? We'll discuss that more in just a minute. BetOnline has you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as the football season continues to march towards the playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit just by using the promo code Locked On. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, so what would it cost to acquire Josh Donaldson? Here is the beautiful thing about this acquisition. When it comes to prospects, it wouldn't cost much because the Twins are trying to get off that contract. To them, that's an albatross, even though he's still a good player. For the Mets, this is your opportunity to eat the entire contract and minimize the return you had to give up to acquire him. Now, I could have gone to baseball trade values and used their little trade simulator, but they would say Josh Donaldson has absolutely no value. They'd overvalue a player like JD. I just wasn't sure if that was the best place to go to run my trade by someone. So instead, I hit up my buddy Aram Layton, who's Locked On MLB Prospects, the founder of Just Baseball, the site I write for. He also hates the baseball trade value site, so I know he'll always give me his 2 cents on what a deal could look like. And the deal I threw out there initially, I said, all right, well, what do I have to throw on top of JD Davis to get this trade done? Because I was thinking, JD might be enough. I mean, he's a good player. He's not a great defensive player, but for the Twins, as far as the offensive production, they'd be losing in Donaldson. JD can make up for some of that while playing third base, albeit not well. And he'd be on a contract that makes a lot of sense to them. But I wasn't sure if that'd be enough. I thought there might have to be a package thrown in. And Aram said, honestly, 1-for-1, fair value. Okay, so let's just start there. If you're telling me that you could potentially acquire Josh Donaldson for only JD Davis, how do you not do that deal? I'd say tomorrow, but there's a lockout as soon as the lockout is over, because that is a great trade for the New York Mets because you're already trying to get off of JD Davis and Dominic Smith because they don't necessarily fit what you're trying to do. You've been running them out there the last couple of years. It hasn't quite worked. This would give you a fresh face, someone who's far more established, a much better defensive third baseman, a better hitter, brings more power, more home run power in particular. It's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. And if the Twins want prospects and they don't want JD Davis, I'd say in tough luck, okay? I'd maybe say Dominic Smith instead of JD Davis, but that would kind of make your roster, again, you'd have a lot of parts that are similar if JD Davis and Josh Donaldson were on the same team, but then you just have to find another deal for JD Davis. But the bottom line here is you're trading for the salary. You're acquiring the salary and taking that off the Twins' hands. And unless there's another team that's vying for his services, you hold pretty firm on the fact that you're doing them the favor. So if they want a prospect on top of JD Davis, well, now you got to eat some money. If you want Khalil Lee, you got to pay, that entire buyout. Maybe you take that off the table. All right. So now Donaldson's only on the Mets books for the next 2 years, and the Twins handle that. Or the Twins eat $5 million each year, something along those lines. That is what the Mets could do. They have the leverage in this trade discussion if they do go down this road because they are the ones eating all of this money on a player that's in his late 30s. So that is one way this deal can come together. Now, if the Twins really want to get some prospect capital back, what I would say is the piece you need thrown in to sweeten the pot for the Mets, and also a piece the Twins would realistically be willing to move, is Taylor Rogers. The Mets already had interest in Rogers this past season. He was an all-star this year, 3.35 ERA, 59 strikeouts, 40 2/3 innings pitched. Strikeout per nine, 13.2 this year. He has 50 saves dating back to 2018, 30 of them coming in the 2019 season. A devastating sinker-slider combo. So throws that sinker around 95, 96, that slider, just a wipeout pitch. So that would be your Aaron Loop replacement, if not even better next season, honestly. I would trust Taylor Rogers next year to put up a better season than Aaron Loop, but that's just me. I don't know. We'll see what Loop does out in LA, but That would be the package that would really entice me. Now, once we start talking about adding Taylor Rogers, an all-star reliever, into the mix of this deal, I'm not sure how much that changes the prospects you have to give up. I don't know if a JD Khalil Lee for Taylor Rogers, Josh Donaldson trade makes sense. I'm not sure what the Twins would be looking for. But if the Twins are going to try to get prospects for Josh Donaldson while still getting off the money, the only way I'd be giving up any prospects of value is if I could get a piece like Taylor Rogers in the deal, because suddenly now you solve two problems. And Rogers is going to be a free agent after this season. So for the Twins, they would be smart to move him this offseason to try to get some value there. And that's why this trade could make a lot of sense. So when it comes to the different targets the Mets could have this offseason at third base, if you're talking about the cost of acquisition plus the potential production and upside, Donaldson could be the best fit of the entire bunch, because a Jose Ramirez trade, while already pretty unlikely the Guardians are even going to move him, that's going to cost a haul. Matt Chapman, same deal. We've talked about that this offseason. Kris Bryant, going to cost you a massive contract. This is a 2-year big money deal, fits right into your window, plug and play potential all-star third baseman if he has his best type of year, who's going to give you good defense and a lot of home runs. Another right-handed power bat in the middle of that lineup. You'd be able to mix up, Eduardo Escobar, Josh Donaldson, Robinson Cano, Jeff McNeil, all those guys getting time in the infield at the DH spot. For McNeil, I'm sure he gets moved around the outfield a little bit more if you were to make a Donaldson acquisition. But this is a really interesting move for the Mets. The more I thought about it, the more I liked it. And excuse me, if it comes down to it and you get Taylor Rogers on top of it, that's a home run in this offseason for the Mets. Would just keep getting better and better. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, I'm going to talk about how many teams in baseball would take their shortstop over Francisco Lindor. So make sure you tune in for that. Hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Also, it seems like the Buck Showalter press conference is going to take place on Tuesday. So I have coverage of that coming on Wednesday. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day by following Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts.